Welcome back to a Theology of Marriage. In these short videos, we're looking at several important topics to consider about marriage. As counselors and church leaders, we need a solid understanding of what marriage is all about. In the first video, we saw that God created men and women. Both were created in his image, and both were created with incredible value. In this video, we'll look at just 4 verses in Genesis 2:21 through 24, to get a better understanding of this incredible relationship, the relationship between husband and wife. Our most important relationship is our relationship with God. But when we think about our earthly relationships, the relationship of husband and wife is so important. In this passage, God tells us how this relationship is supposed to look. Genesis 2:21 through 23. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib he had taken out of the man, and he brought her to the man. The man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of a man." I like how the first words in the Bible from a human are Adam's excitement about Eve. Why did God make Eve out of Adam's own body? The Bible doesn't tell us the specific reason, but I think it points to the oneness, a closeness between the two. The woman was not made a different kind of being, but the same as the man. Some might say, but the woman was made from the man, so that makes her lower. Now, where does that come from? Remember back in Genesis 1:27, both male and female were created in God's image. So the idea that a woman coming out of the man makes her less, that's not in the Bible. Now, did you notice that God didn't put parents and children in the garden or a couple of men? He put one man and one woman who became one husband and one wife. Marriage was God's design from the beginning. The next verse in our passage gives us an amazing blueprint for what a marriage is supposed to look like. Let's read Genesis 2:24 and see how to follow God's plan for marriage. Verse 24 says, "That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh." We see 3 different actions here: to leave, to unite, and to become one flesh. Let's look at each of these 3. First, leave. What does it mean to leave? In leaving, there's a leaving of other relationships, parents, friends, other potential romantic partners. The idea here in Genesis of leaving is to forsake, to abandon, to leave behind. Because of this leaving, someone is no longer dependent on or under the authority of parents. There's a changing of allegiance. For example, a man with a Kenyan passport, he gives it up for a Tanzanian passport. He still has friends and family in Kenya, but his allegiance is now to his new country. That's the idea here. When you leave, you're not ignoring, but you have a new allegiance, a new focus, your marriage relationship. Why is a man to leave his parents and start a new primary relationship with his wife? Verse 24 said, that is why. Right? That is why a man leaves his father and mother. That is why. So we have to look back. And right before that, in verse 23, we see that the woman was made a close relationship to the man. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. Because God made man and woman to be together, he calls them to form this marriage together and leave father and mother to get married. No one forced the man to get married. He chose to get married, but if he chooses to get married, then he must obey God and leave his parents and make his wife the most important relationship in his life. Now, you might have a question about this. Verse 24 says, a man leaves his father and mother. Does this mean a woman doesn't need to leave? There's no indication in this passage that the command to leave parents is only for the man. Culturally, in Israel, the woman would leave her family. So it's probable that it only refers to the man here because it was assumed that the woman would be leaving. How can a couple be able to truly be united to one another, and the two of them alone, if only the man leaves, but the woman stays in a primary relationship with her family. So although the verse says that the man is supposed to leave, the need to leave is relevant for both the man and the woman. What does this say about the relationship between parent and child? God shows that the parent-child relationship is temporary, but the husband-wife relationship is permanent. When the child's an adult and leaves to get married, we see that the closeness of the relationship between parent and child is no longer primary. So even though the parent-child relationship is so important, in a sense, it's temporary, because eventually that marriage relationship is going to take the primary position. Now, who's permitted to come between a husband and wife? No one, not even mothers. Problems can happen when roles are reversed and the parent-child relationship is treated as the primary relationship instead of the marriage relationship. A spouse might think, if things don't work out, I'll run home to my parents. Or I'm not having fun at home with my spouse, I'm going to go hang out with my old friends. Leaving means that a man must be fully committed to his wife, and a woman must be fully committed to her husband. When a man and a woman do this, a new family is created, and this family must now be their priority. What does leaving mean? Does leaving mean that people should disown their parents? No. Paul writes in 1 Timothy 5:8, anyone who does not provide for their relatives, and especially for their own household, has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Adult children are still held accountable for the care of their larger family, including parents. Leaving your parents does not mean ignoring them or not spending any time with them. I'm wondering if maybe you feel uncomfortable with this idea of leaving parents. It doesn't seem very cultural, does it? There's a strong cultural value in honoring your parents. There's a strong connection there. In some cultures, the parent-child relationship is expected to continue to be the primary relationship even after marriage. Also, what does it mean to leave friends, to leave others? I can really only be with one person for the rest of my life? Yes, that's what it means. It means you will never have another romantic partner. So as we think of the idea of leaving, what are some ways that you can honor your spouse as your primary relationship, but still honor your parents? One suggestion would be to always consult your spouse before seeking advice or input from your parents or your extended family. Maybe go together and asking for advice. And once you've gotten advice, then come and make decisions as a couple. Your parents should not be making decisions in a marriage. It should be the couple making the decisions. Also, and this is really important, don't discuss negative things about your spouse with your parents. Always speak well of your spouse with your parents. Remember, your spouse, that's the primary relationship. So you want to make sure that you honor your husband or your wife. One other idea. As parents grow older and you will be more involved maybe in caring for your aging parents, make decisions as a team, husband and wife. Honor your spouse by discussing these issues. So there are a number of ways that we can continue to honor our parents without having that relationship be the primary relationship. So in Genesis 2:24, we see that the couple needs to leave. We also see in this verse that the couple is called to cleave or be united. Again, we read in verse 24, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. So marriage begins with this leaving, the leaving of other relationships. And then after this forsaking of the parent-child relationship as most important, and choosing the wife, choosing the husband as your most important relationship, the Bible then teaches that the man is to cleave or unite, to be joined with his wife. Now, this here is not really speaking specifically to a sexual union or sexual unification. This is the joining of his soul and his heart with his wife. The Hebrew word unite or cleave means being glued together or to closely pursue. This indicates that the marriage relationship is to be closer than any other human relationship. Now, our illustration for this was to glue two pieces of paper together. And then what was it like to pull them apart? Do you remember? The paper got destroyed. Why? They were no longer two separate pieces of paper, but they had been joined so closely that they could no longer be separated. What are some problems that can happen in a marriage if either the husband or wife fails to unite? Some people make children their priority and they cling to their children. When the children leave home, it's a dangerous time for the marriage, and marriages can fall apart because the primary relationship had been with the children and the husband and wife had not been building their relationship. Another problem is that a person can go back to their parents for advice or their friends. And so one spouse can choose what other people say to be what's driving them. This can push a husband and wife apart because they are not clinging, they are not uniting together, but they're going outside the marriage for advice or direction. For a marriage to be successful, a couple need to be united to one another. And this brings us to the third idea here in Genesis 2:24. To leave, to be united, to become one flesh. We looked at this picture here. Do you remember this picture? What do you see? What's been created? When Eve was brought to Adam, he recognized that Eve was a part of him. Bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. He realized that they were one. We see in this picture two people, but they've been connected together so deeply that they can't be separated. If you look, it's all one line. So you have a man, you have a woman, but they only have one heart. The term one flesh refers to how a man and a woman are no longer two separate people, but through marriage, they've become one, a married couple. The man and woman have created a marriage. There should be oneness in every area: physical, emotional, intellectual, financial, social. This isn't just living together in the same house, it's being joined together, united into one body. Now, the union is sexual, but the Bible is referring to a one flesh union that's beyond just the sexual union. I like what Glenn Scrivener writes in his book, The Air We Breathe. He writes, in the Bible, sex is marital and marriage is sexual. The one flesh act, sex, belongs in the one flesh union, marriage. Sex is a part of this being one flesh. But really, we're talking about a husband and a wife. No longer two separate people, but now part of a married couple. Regarding human relationships, your spouse and your marriage must be your top priority. No other human should get more of your love, attention, and focus. One thing that can bring Christian ministers down is their marriages. Too many pastors and church leaders have ignored this call to leave, unite, and become one flesh, and their marriages have fallen apart. If we want to strengthen our marriages, first, make your relationship with Christ the center of your life. Then, as you think about your relationships with other people, be sure that your marriage is prioritized. View your spouse as a higher ministry than the work that you are doing. God calls husbands to love their wives. God never calls husbands to love their ministry. Our wives should be our priority. If we apply what we have learned here in Genesis 2:24, we are well on our way to strengthening our marriages for the glory of God. In our next video, we will look at the idea of marriage being a covenant. See you then.